Discover China. There is a place that many consider to be heaven on earth. Sacred and silent, it bears a spiritual air that is rare to any earthly palace. The plan, design, construction, and atmosphere express reverence for heaven and the gods. This magical place is the Temple of Heaven in Beijing. Discover China enters this sacred place by cutting through the mist of the Temple of Heaven. In the year 1398, Zhu Yuanzhang, the founder of the Ming Dynasty, died. When the news reached the former capital of the Yuan dynasty, Beiping, Zhu Di, the Prince of Yan, marched south and started a civil war. He spent 4 years conquering Nanjing, the capital of the Ming dynasty, and usurped the throne from his nephew, Zhu Yunwen, known as Emperor Jianwen. Zhu Di's rebellion provoked criticism and condemnation from former officials of Emperor Jianwen. Like a plague, the criticism quickly spread among the court and the public. This struck terror in Zhu Di's heart. He would lose sleep with worry. Eventually, he found it impossible for him to continue and stay in Nanjing. Zhu Di missed Beiping, his own capital, when he was the Prince of Yan. He was determined to undertake a gigantic task during his lifetime to move the Ming dynasty's capital from Nanjing to Beiping. Showing no signs of his intention, Zhu Di secretly summoned a geomancer called Zheng Zongjian, asking him to go back to Beiping as soon as possible and find a good location for a new palace. A few months later, Zheng Zongjian successfully completed his task. After the inspection of the city's topography, the remarkable building was decided to be located to the southeast of Lijiang Gate of Beiping. According to the yin and yang and five-element theory, a southern direction has special significance. It is considered as yang, the location of the heavens. In 1406, construction of Zhu Di's secret dream had begun. The project was supervised by Kuai Xiang, the Deputy Minister of Public Works. Kuai was trained as a skilled carpenter. To present day, thanks to ancient geomancer Zheng's recommendation, we are witnesses to some of the most amazing architecture in the world, Beijing's Temple of Heaven. The Temple of Heaven covers an area of 273 hectares. It is enclosed by 2 tiers of walls, dividing itself into 2 parts, the inner altar and the outer altar. The main buildings are grouped in the inner altar grounds. Having gone through successive restoration and renovation works by subsequent dynasties, the temple today is a far cry from the altar of heaven and earth thought up and constructed by Kuai Xiang. The main building of the altar of heaven and earth by Kuai Xiong was the Hall of Great Sacrifices. It was a square palace with golden yellow tiles, an immense marble terrace, double eaves, and a curved roof ridge. The Hall of Worship was destroyed long ago. We can only find its traces in ancient literature concerning the construction of the structure. Near the west gate stands the Palace of Abstinence, in which the Ningxi Hall gives an indication of what the Hall of Great Sacrifice looked like in 1420 during the Yongle period of the Ming Dynasty. The Hall of Great Sacrifice is more like one of the palaces in the Forbidden City, designed for human occupants to live in rather than an altar to worship the heavens. This, perhaps, is the reason for the repeated renovations and reconstruction of the altar of heaven and earth. In the first lunar month, spring 1421, Zhu Di held a grand heaven and earth worshipping ceremony in the south suburb, which put the newly built Great Hall of Sacrifice into use for the very first time. According to historical records, heaven worshipping in China dates back to the Xia dynasty. The emperors of all dynasties called themselves sons of heaven, believing they were empowered by the heavens to rule the country. Because of that belief, the emperors felt they must worship heaven and earth when assuming the throne. This would allow them to rule in peace and prosperity under the guidance and protection of the heavens themselves. The belief that all emperors were the sons of heaven made Zhu Di very ill at ease. He was not the designated successor of the throne. He took it by killing Emperor Jian Wen. That meant he was not entitled to the throne. Zhu Di felt threatened by enemies everywhere he looked. He needed to prove to the world that he was one of the sons of heaven by conducting heavenly worshipping ceremonies. Zhu Di had the Temple of Heaven and Earth built in the capital of his former kingdom. By then, Beiping had changed its name to Beijing. Zhu Di himself performed the most solemn heaven-worshipping ceremony. After the ceremony, Zhu Di felt like he had been blessed by the gods. His throne was thus safer. He could use imperial orders and decrees with entitlement. Moving the capital from Nanjing to Beijing thus became the most natural progression. In 1421, Zhu Di fulfilled that wish and moved the capital to Beijing. As the sands of time went by, another coronation ceremony for another emperor at the altar of heaven and earth took place. In 1512, Zhu Hozong, the son of Prince Xingxian, traveled urgently from Anlu in Hubei province to the capital. He was only 15 years old then. His urgency was due to the death of Emperor Wuzong, who had not left an heir to the Ming dynasty. Zhu Hozong succeeded the throne and became Emperor Jiajing. To everybody's surprise, Emperor Jiajing was very unhappy with the square hall of great sacrifice used for his coronation ceremony. He repeatedly ordered his officials to rebuild the hall. Many officials couldn't help but wonder what was wrong with the Hall of Great Sacrifice. Why was the little emperor so unpleased with it that he would venture to have such an important and sacred temple changed during his reign? In 1530, appointing Xia Yan as the supervisor, Emperor Jiajing decreed that a round altar was to be built to the south of the Hall of Great Sacrifice. He also ordered that the name of the temple should change from the Temple of Heaven and Earth to the Temple of Heaven. Xia Yan then reported to Emperor Jiajing that as early as the beginning of the Western Zhou dynasty, Zhou Gong, who served as regent during the reign of the young Emperor Cheng, established the regulation of offering sacrifices to heaven on the circular mound at the time of the winter solstice. Thus, the altar got its name, Circular Mound Altar, which is still used today. By sourcing historical documents, Xia Yan claimed that to symbolize the natural rules of the universe, the structure and the dimensions of the altar must follow the great ancient book of changes, the I Ching. Emperor Jiajing nodded in agreement, but in actuality, he had other plans on his mind. Today we know that the top tier of the circular mound altar measures 9 zheng, which is about 23.65 meters in diameter. In the center of the platform is a round stone slab surrounded by 9 concentric circles of fan-shaped stone slabs, and the surrounding stone slabs are all arranged in multiples of the number 9. The altar is a 3-tiered circular marble terrace built with the best white marble called Aya Qing. The base of the altar is a pedestal, which style has been used since the 6th Dynasty's period, the time that Buddhism was first introduced to China. As a unique specimen of ancient Chinese architecture, the open-air altar in the Temple of Heaven has several different features from European temples. Instead of expressing the mystery and overwhelming power of the gods by building tall and solemn statues, the Chinese altar demonstrates the greatness of nature and the harmony between heaven, earth, and humans. The ancient Chinese called the universe heaven, which was thought to be round. They called the land, seas, and mountains earth, and the earth was thought to be a square platform carrying human beings and all the creatures of nature. By imitating nature in their architecture, the ancient Chinese showed a special understanding of the universe by following the concept of human beings as an integral part of nature. The white marble circular mound altar has undergone hundreds of royal sacrificial ceremonies. It is a sacred place where people were thought to be able to converse with the heavens. However, the circular mound altar did not meet all of Emperor Jiajing's wishes. Like Zhu Di at the time, Emperor Jiajing was not a legitimate heir to the throne. Though being crowned, the emperor felt the contemptuous looks gazing on him wherever he went. He had to call the late Emperor Wuzong his father, while his real, biological father's spirit tablet could not even be worshipped and honored as other late emperors. Emperor Jiajing was miserable, and to add insult to injury, his opposition was ready to overthrow his regime, and a palace coup might be staged at any given moment. The consequences would be disastrous. Emperor Beijing thus plotted a unique way to strengthen his imperial rule. With construction on the circular mound altar completed, Emperor Beijing established a series of rules for worshiping the heavens. Though the reconstruction of the Temple of Heaven and Earth was widely reproached and criticized, Beijing insisted on it as if a test to the loyalty of his subordinates. In 1530, Emperor Beijing constructed the Imperial Vault of Heaven. This structure was built for housing the spirit tablets of the supreme rulers of heaven and the ancestors of emperors. It was a circular structure covered with dark azure glazed tiles and a gilded vault pointing directly towards the heavens. Directly to the north of the Imperial Vault of Heaven is a boulevard called Danbi Chao. It connects the circular mound altar and a hall of great sacrifice. This walkway was built under Beijing's orders. Danbi Chao then divides the inner temple into two even parts, adding a symmetrical beauty to the architecture. On top of Danbi Chao are three routes marked out by stone slabs. The central route was made for the gods. The one to the east was for the emperor, while the one to the west was for the royal family members and court officials. After the completion of the circular mound altar, the Hall of Great Sacrifice lost its former glory of holding sacrificial ceremonies. However, the emperor did not forget the square hall. In 1540, he ordered the square hall replaced with a new round hall called the Hall of Great Enjoyment. Again, the architectural concept was in accordance with the theory that heaven is round. The Hall of Great Enjoyment was a round wooden structure bearing triple eaves and a crested ceiling. It was the predecessor of the Hall of Prayers for Good Harvests. It was said that after the completion of the Hall of Great Enjoyment, a Taoist priest told Emperor Beijing that the southeast of the hall was far too open and empty, which meant harm to the dynasty's rule. According to that priest, there was a need for some rocks in there in order to maintain good feng shui. Beijing was a devout Taoist. He adopted the priest's suggestions. To this day, we can see that suggestion come to life with the 7-star stones located inside the Temple of Heaven. What is the particular significance of the number 7? According to historical records, the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, held the first great worshiping ceremony to heaven and earth at Tai Mountain. Following suit, future emperors did the same. However, it was quite challenging and costly to travel all the way to Tai Mountain for the sacrificial rites. By the time of Emperor Zhenzong of the Song dynasty, this practice had more or less subsided. Emperors built temples near the capital instead of going to Tai Mountain for worshiping. The 7-star stones, carved like mountains, symbolized the 7 peaks of Tai Mountain. The placement of the 7 stones shows the long history of China's heaven worshiping culture. Strangely, though, there are 8 and not 7 rocks at the 7-star stone site. The smallest rock was said to be added by Emperor Qianlong of the Qing dynasty. Emperor Qianlong adopted Confucianism for ruling the country. He had hoped his Manchu regime originating from the far north of China would fit into mainstream Chinese culture. He thus added the 8th rock to the 7-star stones as a sign of his auspicious wishes. In 1751, a new chapter of large-scale reconstruction at the Temple of Heaven had begun. The previous multicolored glazed tiles covering the eaves and roof of the buildings were completely replaced by deep azure tiles. With the reconstruction completed, the Hall of Great Enjoyment was renamed as the Hall of Prayer for Good Harvest. Unfortunately, the hall was struck by lightning in 1889 and subsequently caught fire. Because the pillars in the hall were made of sandalwood trunks, the Beijing winds carried the fragrant scent of the hall's destruction miles away. Emperor Guangxu ordered the reconstruction of the Hall of Prayer for Good Harvest the next year. Memories of the workers who participated in the former construction work proved useful to the reconstruction. By then, the layout and size of the Temple of Heaven complex was basically set. Today, as a chief example of some of the foremost architecture of heaven worshipping, the Temple of Heaven is attracting visitors from all over the world, with millions of people each year frequenting its grounds. To ancient emperors, offering sacrifices to heaven was the most solemn of occasions. The emperors led his court officials and people in prayer for good and bountiful harvest for the next year. The Temple of Heaven, having witnessed numerous dynasties, has acquired a cultural aura rarely seen in any other structure on the planet. For centuries, the unique and symbolic design and layout of the Temple of Heaven has deeply influenced the architecture and planning of buildings of worship around the Far East. The mysterious royal sacrificial ceremonies have long become stories of the past. Through the temple's carefully placed marble slabs, majestic sandalwood pillars, its heaven-bound vault and altar, people today can still visualize the grandeur of old. The Temple of Heaven has thus become one of the most precious treasures in China's history.